On October 10, 1957, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower formally apologizes to Ghanaian diplomat Komla Agbeli Gbedemah, who had been refused service at a restaurant in Delaware 3 days before because of racial segregation. Just 7 months earlier, the West African nation of Ghana had won its independence from Britain, becoming the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to gain freedom from European colonial rule. Vice President Richard Nixon had, in fact, represented the United States at the ceremony in the Ghanaian capital of Accra that marked the transition from a British colony known as Gold Coast to the independent nation of Ghana. While in Ghana, Nixon met with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who also attended the ceremony. Additionally, Finance Minister Gbedemah entertained the vice president in his own home. It was the height of the Cold War, and both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were competing for the hearts and minds of hundreds of millions of people in Africa and Asia. The U.S. feared a domino effect, that as one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would follow. Gbedemah's visit to the U.S. was meant to foster a positive relationship with the young nation. On April 7, 1957, Gbedemah and an aide, both wearing business suits, entered a Howard Johnson's restaurant in Dover and ordered 2 orange juices. They were handed the juices in to-go cups and told they would need to take them outside because, as Gbedemah informed reporters, a waitress, quote, told me colored people were not allowed to eat in the restaurant, end quote. Gbedemah protested to the manager, showing him an ID card and explaining who he was, but the manager wouldn't budge. Gbedemah paid for the orange juices, left them on the counter, and walked out. The Ghanaian diplomat told the press, quote, "If the vice president of the U.S. can have a meal in my house when he is in Ghana, then I cannot understand why I must receive this treatment at a roadside restaurant in America," end quote. At that time in U.S. history, racial discrimination was, as one American official put it, the nation's Achilles heel when it came to international relations. So, a race-related international incident was the last thing President Eisenhower wanted. He reacted by inviting Gbedemah to the White House for breakfast 3 days later, on October 10th. Gbedemah later said, quote, "The president expressed personal apologies for all that was done in Delaware," end quote. Howard Cook, the owner of the Howard Johnson franchise in Dover, phoned Gbedemah and apologized. 18 months later, MLK wrote the finance minister and expressed regret that he had, quote, "faced such a humiliating experience in our country," end quote. King added that President Eisenhower's hastily arranged breakfast meeting showed that the U.S. was becoming, quote, "more sensitive to the rolling tide of world opinion than ever before," end quote. Unfortunately, Gbedemah's experience was not an isolated incident. Over the next few years, dozens of diplomats from African and Asian nations faced housing discrimination in Washington, D.C., and found themselves in similar confrontations in restaurants, barbershops, and other businesses in and around the nation's capital. The American Civil Rights Movement had become an international Cold War issue. Delaware, by the way, finally ended racial segregation in the state in 1963. I have a bit of a personal connection to this event since my son lived in Ghana for nearly 2 years, beginning in 2018. He loved his time there and found the people of Ghana to be warm and welcoming. He also found the history and culture of the country fascinating. While my son was living there in 2018, Ghanaian diplomat Kofi Annan passed away at age 80. He had served as Secretary General of the United Nations from 1997 to 2006. A huge state funeral was held in the capital of Accra and was attended by dignitaries from around the world. My son was also able to witness the nation's Year of Return in 2019, when Ghana commemorated the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans arriving in what is now the U.S. The purpose of the Year of Return was to invite people of West African ancestry to visit the country. The campaign successfully increased tourism, attracting notable entertainment figures and even a U.S. congressional delegation led by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. My son's time in Ghana was cut short when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in March 2020. He booked a flight home that was to go through London, but it was cancelled as London's Heathrow Airport restricted international travel and Ghana closed its borders. It was a stressful time as we worked to try to get our son back to the U.S. The U.S. State Department stepped in and saved the day, chartering several flights for Americans like my son who were unable to get home any other way. It was one of the happiest and strangest days of my life when we picked up my son at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, which is normally one of the busiest in the United States. The airport was nearly empty, almost like a ghost town. Only a few other people got off his flight, and there was almost no one else in baggage claim. It was bizarre, and drove home the impact of the pandemic. My son is hoping to one day make a return visit to Ghana. Here are other events that happened today in history. In 732, the Franks halt the Moorish advance into Western Europe at the Battle of Tours. In 1801, opera composer Giuseppe Verdi is born in the tiny village of Le Roncole in northern Italy. In 1845, the prestigious U.S. Naval Academy opens at Fort Severn in Annapolis, Maryland. In 1944, 800 Romani children are systematically murdered in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. In 1973, U.S. President Spiro Agnew resigns due to a corruption scandal unrelated to Watergate. In 2004, Christopher Reeve dies at 52, 9 years after a horse riding accident left him paralyzed. In 2022, the NFL adds new criteria to its concussion protocol in the wake of a Tua Tagovailoa injury. And now it's time for our Today in History quiz. Apple Computers was not allowed to run music software on its devices until 1991 because of a trademark dispute with which music group? The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, or AC/DC? Think you know the answer? Drop your guesses in the comments below. Find out if you're right next time on Today in History. You made it through Today in History. Nice work. Now treat yourself. Click the video on the right for what happened yesterday in history. Still can't get enough? The link on the left's got the whole playlist buffet. Want to make history a daily habit? Click my face in the middle to subscribe.